Hello friends, welcome back to Cosmopolitan Cornbread. So today I'm in here in the kitchen and I'm canning up something that I don't think you see canned very often, and that is maple syrup. I get my maple syrup from Azure Standard, like I get a lot of my pantry items and freezer items. And it comes in these great big plastic jugs. Now, I bought it, I have 2 gallons of it, and we don't go through maple syrup very quickly. And I don't want to store my maple syrup in these plastic jugs. And so I got to thinking, I wonder if I can can it. And so did a little bit of searching, talked to my friend Heather about it, and we both found 2 different maple syrup farms that had canning instructions on their websites. And so I decided I was going to go ahead and can this up. And I'm going to can it by pints. That way I've got just kind of smaller amounts, something that's a more reasonable quantity that we would go through in a relatively quickly amount of time, in opposed to a whole great big gallon like this that would take us probably a couple of years to get through. And of course there's the whole storing things in plastic. And maple syrup can be stored very long term, just like honey, but over time it can start taking on the flavor of the container that it's in. And so I decided I'm going to go ahead and can up my maple syrup, and so that's what I'm doing today. I've got the 2 gallons of maple syrup minus the part that I used for my last canning recipe, the maple onion jam, here in my great big pot, and I'm going to bring this up to a gentle boil. And while that's heating up, I'm going to go ahead and wash up my pint jars, and I'm just going to use my steam canner today. Now, because I'm canning up almost 2 gallons of maple syrup, I'll need to go through 2 rounds with my steam canner over here, which is fine because the maple syrup does not process that long, and the steam canner heats up so quickly and cools down so quickly that it's really easy for me to do double batches with the steam canner. It would probably end up taking less time than getting out my great big hot water bath canner, heating that great big thing up, and canning with that. I don't think it would save me any time to double stack in the hot water bath canner. So we're just going to use the steam canner like I generally do for things like this. Alright, so my jars and my canner are hot, the maple syrup is nice and piping hot. Brought it up to a gentle boil, and I kind of turned it down. Doesn't need to be crazy boiling while I'm canning it. I've got my lids over here in hot water, washed, everything inspected. Now I put my canning jars in the oven on a baking sheet on the warm setting, so they're nice and hot, but they're not gathering up a lot of moisture, because I don't want to put a lot of moisture in my maple syrup because I don't want it to crystallize like honey does. So I'm just going to reach into the oven, grab out a jar as I need it. Okay. Now, when I was reading on doing this, I didn't see anything about needing to skim off the foam on the top of the maple syrup. I'm thinking as it cools, that'll settle down. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave it on there. And we're just going to start ladling this in. And they said to leave a 1/2 inch of head space for the maple syrup. All right. Ooh, piping hot. Let me grab another jar. I'm not going to bother debubbling this. This is straight up pure liquid. I know a lot of people will still take the little wand and swirl around in there, but when it's something that is just straight liquid, I honestly don't see the point. I don't usually do that if I'm making jelly. Now I will if I'm doing jam, because there's objects in there, there's solids in there that can catch air bubbles, but if it's just straight up liquid, honestly, I just don't bother. So I've got my white vinegar and my damp rag. We're going to dip into there, wipe off the top of the jar, grab one of the lids, put that on there, on with a ring. And these are super hot, so I'm just going to use my lifter to put it back into, or put it into the canner. Right there. And I'm just going to continue jarring up the maple syrup. All right, my canner is full. I've got 8 pints of maple syrup, so I'm going to go ahead and throw the dome on the steam canner. Let this come up to temperature, and the processing time for the maple syrup is 15 minutes. And that doesn't matter if it's quarts or pints. Either one, I'm just using pints because we don't really go through, again, maple syrup that quickly, and so it just makes sense for me to do it in pints. So when this comes up to temperature, I'll set my timer and we'll start processing. All right, I got the first round of the maple syrup done, and it's over here cooling on the counter on the cooling mat. While those were processing, I went ahead and continued to jar up the rest of the maple syrup. I just stuck it back into the oven to keep it nice and hot. And then as soon as those jars came out, I put the other filled jars in. So now I'm bringing that up to temperature so that those can process. And again, it's 15 minutes for my elevation. You always have to adjust canning recipes based on your elevation if you're over 1,000 feet. And I have an article on my website that explains how to do that. You do have to make adjustments for hot water bath canning and for pressure canning. But I had the first 8 pints done. I did only 7 pints here because the last pint I went ahead and I put into a jar with a little cap that I have that will allow me to pour the syrup. Now I do actually have some other caps that have a handle that actually turns your mason jar into a pitcher. I just can't remember where I put them, but this will work in the meantime, and this will go into the refrigerator to be used. Another reason for canning the maple syrup is not only to make it last longer, but once you open real maple syrup, you're supposed to refrigerate the container. And kind of hard to refrigerate a great big gallon jug. So this makes it much more refrigerator friendly, as well as preserving its longevity in the pantry. All right, there we go. We've got altogether 16 pints of real maple syrup, organic maple syrup from Azure Standard that I've repackaged and processed for more long-term storage in, container sizes that are more usable for us in our household. And right now I'll let these cool overnight. Tomorrow I will remove the rings, test the seals, wash the jars with some nice soapy water with a splash of vinegar, dry them, label them, and put them away in the pantry. So you can get a printable version of these instructions on my website, cosmopolitancornbread.com. I'll put a link to that in the video description down below. And thank you for joining me here again at the Homestead Kitchen. My name is Constance from Cosmopolitan Cornbread. God bless, and I'll talk to you all next time.